Hey everyone, welcome back to the Out of Spec podcast. Francie here. Don't you recognize me, your host for your favorite podcast about electric vehicles? Thank you for joining me. I hope you're having a great day. Today, I am lucky enough again to talk to my buddy Colton from Out of Spec Detailing about another lease. We recently spoke about his EV6 lease, but now we're going to talk about his older lease that he got years ago for his Tesla Model 3 long range. It was kind of his introduction into EVs that's led him where he is today. But to get out of it early, he would have to pay a very pretty penny. So he's going to tell us all about it, all the details, and maybe give you a little bit of insight into what lease deals look like, especially from Tesla. It's not necessarily fine print, but you do want to know what you're getting into when leasing from any automaker. So let's plug in with Colton. This episode is made possible by the support we get from Fort Collins Kia. If you are in the market for any electric Kia, not only do they never add market adjustments, they will deliver your car to you anywhere in the 48 contiguous states for out-of-spec viewers. More information in the link in the show notes. Like I said, we're about to have Colton on the podcast. Thank goodness. I've missed that guy. He's been busy detailing plenty of EVs up in northern Colorado. Make sure to check him out on Out-of-Spec Detailing if you haven't already. And we're going to talk about his Tesla lease. Colton has been driving this. He loves the Model 3 for years now, and he even has a different Model 3 Performance now. He has also the EV6 leased. There's a crazy deal up in northern Colorado, so that is a podcast in itself. So make sure to check that out. Just search it up. You've got it. It was recent. But today we're going to talk about what might make it difficult to get out of a lease with Tesla and basically the decision that he's making to just let it sit since he's already hit the 30,000 mile marker and he doesn't want to pay to return it early. So the questions of, okay, why would it be more expensive to return it early? What does this really mean for Colton and his wife if they're leasing this vehicle and they just kind of have to sit on it? And then also we're just going to talk about generally what it means to lease an EV and make that decision over buying one, because it's definitely a personal option and you want to be informed. So we're going to dive into Colton's experience, the details of the lease, how he's hit his 30,000 mile limit, but he still has time left, and some of the challenges he's faced. Overall, I think it's a good story because Colton wouldn't be here if it weren't for this lease. But again, like I said, I think it'll have some helpful information if you're looking to lease yourself. Let's invite Colton to the podcast now. Okay, I am so lucky to be joined once again by my friend Colton from Out of Spec Detailing, Clear Detailing up in northern Colorado. You are a rock star, Colton. Thank you for coming back onto the podcast to talk more leasing. We've got a lot of leasing topics to talk about.
Sure do.
How's it
Definitely
going?
Doing great. Yeah, just busy as ever here, sitting in my newly leased Kia EV6 and absolutely loving it.
Yeah, we have a whole podcast about that as well. Y'all, so make sure to check it out. Colton got a stellar deal on a Kia EV6, and you probably want to know about it, as well as his impressions of the EV in general. You have driven a lot of them. You've also detailed a lot of EVs. You have hands-on experience with EVs. And this isn't the only lease you have. So I'd love to talk about just when did you first lease an EV? What was it? Why did you decide to do it?
So I have been a car guy my entire life, really starting out with actually hot rods. So my grandfather and uncle built, old vehicles. I own a 1932 Ford 3-window as well that literally nobody's ever seen here on, socials and things like that. Kyle hasn't even driven it. So I've been a gearhead my entire life. And I've been one of these guys that I enjoy different driving experiences. I've owned many different vehicles now. I've owned 3 or 4 different minis. I've had, a mini John Cooper Works GP2, which is how Kyle and I actually started to become friends, which is really cool. I've had Audis, I've had Land Cruisers, Volkswagens. I've had a bunch of different driving experiences. So in, I guess, mid 2021, we took a road trip down to Arizona in my Volkswagen All-Track at the time. And I had started to consider getting an electric car. They have been, I think Model Y at the time was just coming out or a little bit before that. And I started seeing more and more of them on the road. And I'm like, this seems pretty interesting. And one of the most interesting things you see on those is how fast they are. I've always been, I like to go fast, go up canyon roads, go enjoy my drives. And funny enough, I was looking before we went on this big road trip down to Tucson at getting a Tesla. And while I was driving down there, I said, there is no freaking way I could do an EV. Like, they're just dealing with charging stops and all of that stuff. I was like, this is so much better. Combustion's the way. Then a few months after, I got, I don't know, bored one day, and I just said, you know what, I'm going to drive over to Tesla and I want to go look at a Model 3. Now, my experience with Tesla at the time and EVs in general had been very minimum. So I had been in an older Model S, and I was like, what a piece of junk this thing is. I couldn't believe it. I was working with, Audi and Porsche at the time, detailing some of their vehicles. So I've driven Audi e-trons, and I'm like, okay, this is kind of cool, but the range isn't that good. Didn't understand charging or anything like that. But the story goes, went over to Tesla on a board one day and just popped in the showroom and talked to them. And I said, hey, I just like to experience one of these cars. And I test drove a Model 3 Performance. And I got to be honest, I came out of it going, are you freaking kidding me? People drive these on a daily basis. Like, this thing is a freaking rocket. I could not believe it. I mean, coming from, 200, 300 wheel horsepower minis and things like that, I was like, oh my God, these things are so fast. And, I'd been in some very fast Audis, RS7s, RS6s, GT3 Porsches and stuff at the time, but I could not believe the power that this car had. It literally so much that my first fast car experience was really a Model 3 Performance, and I had a headache the entire day when I got home. Your body gets used to these vehicles so much. So I went home and I was like, I told Jess at the time, my wife, I said, I freaking have to get a Model 3. I can't not. And funny enough, at the time I was leasing a Volkswagen Alltrack. It was around, $300-400 a month through Volkswagen, and the car market was hot at the time. So what I actually ended up doing was terminating my lease about almost 2 years early, and basically got $5,000 in cash out of it because the car values were so inflated at the time. I think this may have been, gosh, I'm not good with remembering years and what was going on at such year, but I think it was around COVID timing when, car market was super inflated. People are paying over sticker for vehicles and cars weren't coming in. So they're looking for inventory and things like that. And I ended up getting out of that car super well. So I was really interested in the Model 3 Performance. At the time, my business was doing very well, but I just purchased the shop behind me, and it's a lot of expenses. I bought this shop, put thousands, if not almost $100,000 into the build out of my unit back here, doing a mezzanine, getting the floors dialed in, getting, pressure washer, all the detailing stuff set up for what I needed here. So I was like, okay, I don't want to spend $8,000 more for a Model 3 Performance. I don't want to purchase this vehicle. I don't know what the value is going to be after a few years. And I'm also someone who likes to trade out cars quite a bit. So I ended up settling on a Model 3 long range. And I did, at the time, that car was $52,000 or so MSRP. I ended up doing a 36-month lease at 10,000 miles a year. So right at 30,000 miles. And that was in September of 2021. And I fell in love with the EV experience. And honestly, I wouldn't be here on Out of Spec or with Kyle or any of y'all if I had not gotten that car. So it's kind of a cool story how I got into EVs and had experienced them for a while. And that really kind of transitioned me into, becoming more of a friend with Kyle and starting the Out of Spec detailing channel. So that car really built, my career with doing YouTube and social media and things like that. So it's been a fun experience. But that lease I'm paying $722 a month for, which is not cheap. At the time, it was like, oh, this is easy to afford. We didn't have, as many cars as I do now. We always say more money, more problems here. And that's could not be more the case. And now we just have cars freaking everywhere.
Yeah, sometimes we put ourselves in sticky situations, but it is so cool to hear everyone's like gateway story to electric. And they're all super different, especially if you're coming from a car performance appreciation. If you get in an EV and you just had no idea what they were capable of, that can change your world. If you're coming from, I don't know, I just want like a quiet little commuter car, and why not have it run on a battery? And then you get in one, you're like, this is the perfect thing to take around town. Whatever it is, it's cool to figure out what your gateway EV drug was. But it wouldn't be a true drama, Colton, if it was just all love and ease, right? So Tesla is, one of the most common EVs on the road. They have revolutionized the EV market. They converted you a bit, and they remain one of the most popular choices. The Model Y is the best-selling EV, and the Model 3 is also great value for what you get. And in recent times, Tesla has had a lot of leases and competitive pricing that have become popular as well. But they do come with their own set of rules and challenges that you've kind of figured out the hard way, if I'm going to put it into my own words. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, Francie, one of the biggest things is you can't, buy the lease out at the end of your lease term. So as I talked about earlier, my Volkswagen Alltrack, I literally had the car for a year and a half on a 3-year lease and dumped it and actually made money off of it. That is not possible to do with Tesla. So I am now getting to the point where I'm within that 90-day window of the Model 3 long range that I got, the 2021. It's time for it to go. And unfortunately, I am right at 30,000 miles. Now, I posted this on Twitter and people are like, why not just keep driving it? I have other vehicles to put miles on. To me, it doesn't make any sense to write Tesla a check at the end of this for 25 cents a mile over that you put on this car and just extend how much more I'm paying on that car. Now, when you extrapolate that out, it's actually not that crazy expensive. If you put 10,000 miles on, that Model 3 long range, it's $2,500. And realistically, for 10,000 miles, that's kind of cheap to drive. But why do that when I have other cars and experiences to, jump in and do? So I've loved the car. Do not get me wrong on that. But the experience of how I like to trade cars started to become a problem because, as you guys know, I now have a Model 3 Performance. If it was any other manufacturer, I could have gotten out of that lease probably quite easily, either just paid off the rest of the lease or maybe even just gotten out of it because the car's value was, where the residual was, whatever it would have been. But Tesla really locks you into that 3 years, 30,000 miles or whatever you ended up doing on that. So that was a little bit of, I would say, a frustration. And now the car just sits, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I think it's good that folks know that they can go and look at what Tesla says is optional at the end of your lease. But with the experience, like you described at the top of this podcast, was that you were able to get out of another lease and get into this one, basically. So you were like, I just had an experience. Why would I expect anything different? But maybe let's talk about the penalties that you are apparently would experience if you were going to try to early terminate your lease, even though it kind of seems like to me, well, you used all the miles that you were granted without having to pay more. So it's about time. Why don't y'all take the car back?
Yeah.
No harm, no foul, but there is harm.
So in October, when I bought my Performance, Francie, yep, perfect. You pulled that up. So back in October, when I was purchasing my new car, I was like, okay, there is an option to early terminate your lease. And if you run through here so you can see what I paid for the car, the principal payments made, all of the other fees, associated things in there. And they essentially wanted $10,000 for me to get out of this lease. And I'm like, I don't owe that much left on the car. $722 a month. I put it out at the time, figuring out, and it was like $3,000 or $4,000 difference, if I remember. What's weird, Francie? This number has not changed. This screenshot is from June 14th of this year. And this is what Tesla wants for me to get out of the lease early. $10,671. And I only have 3 more payments of $722 left. How does that make any sense?
I don't really understand either. Because if they could just recoup, what you would have paid keeping it for however long, sure. But this is quite much more than that.
It's insane.
So it makes me think that, okay, really them having this in their possession is a greater cost than what's on this piece of paper. I would love, listener, your insight as well to what that cost is. They have to lease it out to someone else. and put all the work in, but it's going to happen anyways? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it's strange to me, and Tesla just they seem so rigid on their rules, and it is so unbelievably hard to find the right person to talk to. So going back to my newest car that was basically replacing this Model 3 long range, I started looking at the Model 3 rear wheel drive and reached out to Tesla. I kept trying to figure this out. And every time you put in one of these lease terminations, they contact you. And I started talking to them, finally got to one of the right people, and they said, okay, we can actually, if you're interested in getting a new Model 3 rear wheel drive for your next lease, we can give you some incentives to do so. So those incentives were basically within 90 days of my lease termination, which I believe is on September 24th, 2024, that I could order a new car. They would pay for the last 2 payments of the vehicle, so about $1,400 worth. They would waive I am going to forget this word. What is it? At the end of the lease, you pay disposition fee. So it's about $395. So they would cover that, cover the 2 lease payments, and then do a $500 basically credit on anything that had been damaged in the car. Now, if you guys know me, I'm a detailer. I take very good care of my vehicle. So there was about $2,000 or so, maybe $2,500 worth of incentives for me to get out of this car early, not have to have that payment anymore, jump into a new Model 3. So I was like, okay, that's reasonably appetizing, I would say. I hit my 30,000 miles about a month ago now. So I had basically 4 months left. Again, yes, I can drive the car. I just think it's silly to hand Tesla a check for, a couple $100 more for this car to put miles on when I have other vehicles to do so. Now, what Francie just pulled up here is I'm now within my 90-day window. So on 91 days, Francie, it's $10,600 to get out of this car. Now, within 90 days, it's $1,437 for me to get out of that car. And a lot of folks are probably wondering, why are you keeping this vehicle? Well, in my mind, why would I pay this off when I can, hold that cash and just basically, pay it off over 2 more months? It's the same amount of money. It doesn't really make sense to me. The other thing is I can shoot content with it. So detailing stuff, we're going to do some videos of how my lease experience has been, how the car's held up after 30,000 miles. Like, there's a lot of things I can still do with this car for the next, I guess we're in 80 days or so now, but it's so strange to me. And getting a hold of Tesla is next to impossible. Trying to find the right person. You're calling, our local service center over here. You get transferred to this person. You have to explain the whole story again. Then you get transferred to this person. You got to explain the whole story again. It's so frustrating to deal with Tesla. Whereas my Volkswagen at the time when I was interested in terminating the lease, I walked into the Volkswagen dealership that I've worked with forever. And within a couple hours, we had the deal done. Car was gone.
Yeah, I see why you would hold on to it. It's interesting that Tesla's hard to get a hold of, that they make it a little bit difficult for you to get out of your lease, but I'm sure there's costs involved on their end. But I think the worst part about this is it was a bit of a surprise to you, that it would actually cost you quite a bit to get out of this if you were ready to. And it seems like they tried to make a decent deal for you, but you didn't even end up going with your next lease being a Tesla. As we know, you're calling in from your newly leased EV6, Kia EV6 Wind that, like we said, we have a podcast about. So I really do think it's worth noting that Tesla and other automakers have pretty incredible lease policies, and it can be so delicious for some people to go after them, but it's worth noting that early termination can be costly. Like you said, it can be hard to find the right point of contact, which can be frustrating. And then that extending a lease, that could also depend on other factors, including if you want a Tesla, the vehicle's condition, the market demand, et cetera, et cetera. And as we know, moving forward, you aren't necessarily embracing another new Tesla, but a different brand. And generally, have you noticed is your approach towards leases just a bit more in depth now, like with the EV6, where you're like, let me make sure that I can get out of this if I need to?
So first need to say I did know when I went into this lease that I couldn't get out of it. And you can't also purchase that vehicle at the end. This car
Yeah.
has to go back to Tesla. Now, that is completely different from basically every other auto manufacturer on the market that essentially, whatever your residual value on the car is, you can negotiate that down if the car is worth less, or you pay that price. I personally am not somebody who's going to lease a car, especially like this EV6. And I think the residual on this car is 35,000 or so. There is not a chance in hell I am paying for this car after 2 years, 35 grand. I'll get something else. At that time, R2 is going to be out. That's definitely at the top of my list as a daily driver. So I'm going into this knowing I'm not going to do that. But there's some negatives, of course, with leasing. First off, you're kind of capped on your mileage, and then it gets very cost prohibitive for a lot of folks to drive it over that. Now, I'm lucky enough, of course, I work very, very hard. Here at my shop, I work 7 days a week. I think a lot of people think this is a glamorous job. I am here 70, 80 hours a week grinding, trying to get cars done. And I work very hard, and I reward myself in something that I enjoy. And that's my vehicles. And a lot of people may say, oh, that's ridiculous that you can afford all this stuff. But I've been working at this for 10 plus years. So it does get frustrating when I hear those comments. I understand. I'm very fortunate for that. But yeah, it's one of those things, Francie. Leasing's not for everybody, and I've seen comments of that. I put 30,000 miles a year on my car. I can't possibly lease a vehicle, and no, that doesn't make sense. But if you can get these cars cheap enough for a spare car, I bet we'll go over 20,000 miles on this. But or maybe we'll park it like we did the Model 3 and have something else at that time. I don't know. I'm very impulsive with buying cars. The deal on this EV6 literally came up within 6 hours. Talked to my wife, said, hey, I'd like to do this. She's like, absolutely. So things change very quickly with me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, your wallet, your choice, right? If this is what you like and there are competitive lease deals, yeah, that's totally your choice. And I feel like you're not the only one who has decided that leasing is the better option for them for whichever reason, and they're interested in that, but also who might have faced a similar situation that you have with your lease where it's a bit, I don't know, annoying trying to get out of the lease.
Yep.
And there are penalties involved. So I would love to hear if anyone else has any stories of any leases that have gone similarly, or if you haven't, I don't know, how would you handle it? Share your stories, share your insights, maybe share your tips as well with other people about leasing EVs. We're leasing the VinFast. I don't really know what tips I have on that yet, but I'll think about
it. Yeah, I mean, I always get the question, and I think leasing is looked down upon because really what you're getting is a car that's more expensive than you can afford traditionally. And that's why I leased my Model 3. It was, I think, $250 or $300 more a month for me to purchase that car. Yes, okay, you don't have any equity in this car, but I would rather have something that then I don't have to worry about selling, because what's the market going to look like in 3 years from when I got that car? And a perfect example, Francie, is our ID4. I purchased that car. It was a $54,000 MSRP vehicle. We still owe $48,000 on that car. It's worth $28,000. I can't get out of that car. I am $20,000 of negative equity on that car. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry. You're not the only one there either. Yeah.
There's tons of folks out there. So I think just the bold statement of, oh, I'd never lease a car, I think is not necessarily valid right now. I mean, I think you and I did a podcast earlier, whether I would lease or buy a car. And I was kind of originally on only lease these things. And then I purchased two and the values dropped on them. So now I'm kind of coming back around to maybe leasing makes more sense. I mean, genuinely, what are these cars market going to look like in 2 years, in 3 years? I don't know. I hope they hit a floor, but these cars are rapidly depreciating. And I think it's something that not enough folks talk about. I mean, we look at Porsche Taycans right now that I had a friend of mine that paid $140,000 for a 4S, put 6,000 miles on the car. I think it's worth 65. Like, it's insane amount of depreciation on these cars. So would you have been better off leasing that car, getting rid of it, and now not having this huge negative equity load that you have to carry around? I mean, I am absolutely stuck in our ID4.
Yeah, that kind of accelerated depreciation, I think is a big part of the conversation, and we want to keep talking about it specifically to point to also the factors that are involved. It's not necessarily that the cars are obsolete, but the technology is advancing quickly, and the competitive pricing, the new market, the new technology means that prices are influenced in many different ways. So I do think that leasing can be a really good option and definitely shouldn't be, I don't know, looked down upon. If you want to and spend a lot of money on a car and you don't care what it's worth in a little bit, go ahead. Lucky you. I think it's valuable though to hear from you, Colton, about these real world scenarios, because I'm sure that our listeners have either themselves or a friend who have gone through something similarly. So I hope it helps them navigate through their own leasing journey as well. I think it can be simple, but it requires a keen eye and a sense of, okay, is this right for me? So don't forget, everyone, to share your questions and your experiences with us. But yeah, Colton, anything else you want to say about your Tesla 3, Model 3 lease, which you will be giving back soon enough in September, right?
Yeah, I would, of course, tell viewers, do not take this as financial advice. Do what makes you most comfortable. If you can't afford a vehicle, don't purchase it. If you can't afford the vehicle, don't lease it, and do what's within your budget. I have circumstances which I work very hard and am able to luckily afford these vehicles and enjoy them and make content with them. I mean, that's another side of the business folks don't really understand is, like this EV6 opens up a whole new breadth of different things I can test on this car versus a car that I've purchased, because I'm getting rid of this car in 2 years. I don't necessarily care exactly how it's going to look in 2 years. And the lease honestly has been great. I mean, genuinely, I do not regret a thing about leasing my Model 3 long range. It got me into an EV. It got me into out of spec and, being with all these viewers. I would genuinely not be here if I still had my Volkswagen Alltrack or never went to the dealership that day to go drive a Model 3. I would not be with out of spec. There is not a question in my mind about that. So the money that all I've spent on that, I think, has been well worth it. There's a lot more to the backstory. And, again, I think it just comes down to get the car you want, and who cares if you're happy with it. It doesn't matter what everybody else thinks. Like, you need to make your own financial decisions and figure that out. And I think it's interesting to have somebody like, Dave, out of spec Dave. He switches cars every 6 months, every year. He's in a very different financial spot than I am. I need to finance these vehicles. I don't have, $50, $60, $70,000 cash to lay out there and then sell it in 6 months. That's just not what I do. So I'd rather pay, lower monthly payments, but then on the back end, it kind of bites you with something like the ID4. So yeah, you have to weigh the pros and cons with this. Yeah. I'm not sure whether buying or leasing is best. I think it's very personal dependent. And some people may say, you know what, driving my 25-year-old car is what I need to do. Y'all are crazy for paying this much money. And that's totally fine.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. It's to each their own. It's not black and white. It's gray. And from these stories, I think we can take lessons. And as you said, this story is a beautiful one, because of this lease, we get to be friends and work together. And you are where you are today. So, full circle, it all works out in the end, right? Thank you,
I
Colton.
absolutely think so. Yeah, I mean, cars are always, most of my friends I have are because of vehicles that I've owned in the past. And, learning different vehicles and being in a Volkswagen group, an Audi group, a hot rod group, an EV group, like, you get to experience all these different people, meet new folks, and have cool experiences, like literally running a YouTube channel. Like, I genuinely never thought I'd be doing this, but because of that Model 3, now I'm here. So I think it's very cool to be able to do things like that.
Yes, it is so cool. And yeah, I can't wait to hear if other people have any, advice to give out about leasing EVs and their experiences, because I think everyone has a bit of a story to tell, whether you decided to buy or lease and that decision in between. So thanks, everyone. Thank you so much, Colton, for your time and energy. If you liked this episode, let us know, like it, share it, review it. Review us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, go over to Colton's channel, Out of Spec Detailing. Do the same things. You're smart. You get it. Drive safe, stay charged. See you next time on the Out of Spec podcast. Bye, y'all.